England is a country located in the southern region of the United Kingdom off the northwestern coast of continental Europe. It is an old nation that has been a prominent country in the world for over a millennium. Throughout its history, England has enacted many major laws that greatly shape how the country is today. According to historyofengland.net, life in the Isles dates all the way back to the Roman era. However, the first notable development of law started in the Norman conquest of 1066. The Norman monarchs were known to take advantage of the people by abusing their powers. This cycle of the abuse of powers neared its end when the reign of King John of England began. King John was unpopular because he was known to increase taxes in order to gain support against the French invasion. Finally, in 1215, he was forced by the people to sign what came to be known as the Magna Carta. Essentially, this law guaranteed people's rights and made sure the king's power was not absolute. Another notable law is the Treason Act of 1351, which codified existing common law and was the first statutory act covering treason. And it also provided an official legal definition for treason. This act is still in effect today. The next landmark legislation was the English Bill of Rights. Its creation began in 1865.
With the death of the merry monarch, the crown passed to yet another steward, James II. Like Charles, James II had no regard for Parliament. He thought it a nuisance and declared he would rule without it. For the English, it was an all too familiar story. Would England be forever ruled by an endless line of Stuart kings? An unhappy thought. So the Bishop of London and 6 laymen took it upon themselves to invite, secretly, the ruler of the Netherlands, William of Orange, to bring his army and protect the English people from their own king. William agreed to the plan, and when he landed with his troops, the English army deserted James and the deposed monarch fled to France. Not a single shot was fired, and England's second revolution came to be known as the Bloodless or Glorious Revolution. The grateful country offered William and his wife Mary the throne, but this time there were strings attached. This time, Englishmen were going to be sure that whoever sat on the throne understood the limits on royal powers before they got the job. A document was drawn up to specify the terms by which England would be governed. It said in part that no laws were to be made or suspended unless Parliament approved. No taxes were to be levied without the consent of Parliament. Trials must have juries. It was lawful to keep arms, and that elections to Parliament must be free. To the joy of the kingdom, William and Mary consented to the terms of this document. John Locke might have called it a social contract, but the English people simply called it their Bill of Rights.
Other notable laws enacted by the Parliament are the Habeas Corpus Act, which secured the individual rights of a person going to jail by allowing the courts to examine its lawfulness, the 1707 and the 1800 Acts of Union, which ultimately created the United Kingdom, the Act of Settlement of 1701, which solidified the process in which the monarchy would ascend the throne, the Representation of the People Act, which extended the right to vote for women, and the European Communities Act of 1972, which made the United Kingdom part of the European Union and ensured that European laws were applied in the UK. Throughout its years, England has had few changes to its system of rule. In the majority of its history, a feudal system had been in place, which was started when William the Conqueror seized the British Isles. When William became the King of England, he established feudalism to solidify his rule.
Feudalism was a political and economic system during the Middle Ages from around the 8th century to the 15th century AD, so it was a system that lasted for many hundreds of years. Feudalism involved 4 levels of society. The king was at the top as he was the leader of the entire kingdom. Beneath him were the feudal lords, also known as nobles or barons, and these were the wealthiest landowners. Following the lords were knights or vassals, and their role was of the fighting warrior, who usually battled on horseback. Finally, on the bottom of society were the peasants or serfs. Peasants were farmers who worked the land, tending to crops and animals. They were the poorest members of the medieval world, but made up the biggest majority of the population. In these four social levels, feudalism worked through an exchange of land for protection, money, or food.
The feudal system had remained in effect for 700 years, but began to decline during the 15th century. The failure of the feudal system was caused by many factors such as the Black Plague, social unrest, and political changes. In its place, an absolute monarchy was put into effect. This meant that the monarch had unrestricted political power over the state and absolute power among the people. This era lasted from 1450 to 1745, which spanned from King Henry VI to King George III. It then transitioned to a constitutional monarchy, where the king or queen acts as the head of state while the legislative power rests within the parliament. The idea of parliament was inspired by Iceland and the Isle of Man, as they were the first countries to establish parliament. This system began in the mid-1800s and still exists today. There have also been many influential leaders that aided in the establishment of England. For example, Edward I ruled from 1271 to 1307. He was able to successfully re-establish the authority of the crown and is credited for solidifying the authority of the parliament. Elizabeth I is also an important leader because she was able to build the world's most powerful navy at the time and was able to defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588. Other than monarchs, Winston Churchill was also a major leader that improved England as a whole. He was the Prime Minister of Britain during World War II and gave many speeches that significantly boosted the morale of the Allies. In addition to historical figures, there have also been fictional characters that have influenced the people of England. The story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table has proved to be very significant in English history. Many of the kings of England during the medieval age have been known to use the Arthurian legend to legitimize their claims on ascending both the Welsh and English thrones. The Knights of the Round Table are also known to go by a chivalric code, which is a code of conduct for the knights. These codes inspire the common citizen to aspire to be just like the heroic Knights of the Round Table. Religion, more specifically Christianity, played a major role in the history of England. In England's early years, religion often had a bigger influence on the people than the crown. Many of the major decisions of the monarch had to be approved by the Pope. However, this trend changed in 1543 when King Henry VII enacted the Act of Supremacy, which made him the head of the Church of England. Even though King Henry VII broke away from Rome, the Catholic faith still remains intact to this day in England. According to royal.gov.uk, in modern-day England, there is a close relationship between the state and the church. Archbishops and bishops are appointed by the Queen on the advice of the Prime Minister, who considers the names elected by a church commission. They take an oath of allegiance to the Queen on appointment and may not resign without royal authority. Gender roles in England remained unchanged prior to World War II. Women were seen as people who should remain loyal to their husbands and raise children. Most women were also expected to stay at home to do household chores such as cooking and cleaning. However, during World War II, women began to hold factory jobs in the absence of the men fighting in the war. When the war was over, many women around the country gained confidence in themselves since they were able to witness that they were able to survive without men. Unlike the United States, England did not have a problem with women being in a position of power, since a good amount of their rulers were women. The influential acts of 1857 marked the first act of the government in granting women equality with men. Many other laws, such as the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975, which made it illegal to discriminate against women in work, and the Parliament Qualification of Women Act of 1918, which allowed for women to run in Parliament, show the advancement of the feminist movement. Slavery is also a significant social structure that shaped England. During the Roman Empire, many slaves were used as a force of labor and a method of entertainment. However, when the Normans took control of the Isles, they established the feudal system which used serfdom instead of slavery. The peasants during the Middle Ages were subject to serfdom, where they were in absolute servitude towards the lord. During the 1700s, many British merchants were active in the Atlantic slave trade. However, Parliament banned this practice in 1807 when they passed the Slave Trade Act, which was also enforced by the British Navy. In 1772, the court case of Somerset v. Stewart established the emancipation of slaves in Wales and England. Slavery was completely abolished by Parliament in 1833 when they passed the Slavery Abolition Act, which prohibited slavery and servitude throughout the British Empire.
Despite being just a fifth of the size of the state of Texas in terms of land area, England has continually spearheaded global developments throughout its history. These developments tend to occur in a variety of fields, including the formation of new political systems, the conceptualization of several economic reforms, the advancement of mathematics, science, and technology with key discoveries and innovations, and even the promotion of a multitude of cultural reforms. As Rigil expanded upon earlier, England's creation of a constitutional monarchy, which is a system of government where the king or queen does not have complete control over the citizens of a state, paved the way towards the development of modern democracy. According to Ranker.com, today, roughly 64% of the world's countries have democratic governments, a statistic that is growing annually. This number would likely be much lower, if not non-existent, if England had not set the standard by adopting a democracy early on. Likewise, in the field of economics, England was the first major nation to implement certain concepts that are central to global trade today. These include the ideas of free trade, mercantilism, and capitalism. Utilizing these economic philosophies, England increased its strength and in the middle of the 18th century became what would today be considered a global superpower. The country built a powerful navy and established prosperous colonies throughout the world, expanding its sphere of dominance and spreading its economic philosophies. England eventually fell from power after nearly 2 centuries at the top, when its colonies had all separated themselves due to their desire for independence, but most of England's economic concepts had already been firmly implanted into these new nations. Another of England's major global contributions was in the area of mathematics and science. Many of the world's greatest thinkers came from England, most notably Isaac Newton with his establishment of gravitational laws and invention of calculus, and Charles Darwin with his theory of evolution. These and several other advancements led to the Industrial Revolution of the early 19th century, possibly the most important technological revolution of all of mankind. The Industrial Revolution was centralized in Britain and spread to Western Europe and North America within a few decades. It marked the transition to a society with an increased use of steam power and machine tools, and triggered a chain reaction where new, life-changing inventions, such as the telephone and the automobile, became commonplace. Without this event, the world would very likely be much less advanced than it is today. Furthermore, throughout its history, England has continually been a prominent figure in the field of cultural reforms. England's most important cultural contribution is unarguably the English language itself, as it has become a global standard and allows the different countries of the world to communicate and interact with one another with ease. Additionally, according to historyworld.org, various new art forms took shape during the Renaissance with more focus placed on linear perspective and realism. Another important development of the Renaissance era occurred in literature, with the establishment of the medieval theater and the multitude of plays written by the illustrious Shakespeare. Similarly, today, various English literary works have gained global recognition, such as The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and Sherlock Holmes series. Although in recent years, England has lost its title as a superpower and a dominator of global affairs to other countries, such as the United States, it continues to be a leader and still has a significant influence on international economics and politics. This can be attributed to its extensive participation in international organizations. England, as a member of the United Kingdom, is one of the founding members of the United Nations and occupies one of the 5 permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, the most powerful body in the UN. Likewise, it is also an important member of the European Union and NATO, ensuring economic cooperation with the other European nations and political and military alliances with several powerful countries around the world. One major political controversy in England has to do with the issue of genetic modification.
British lawmakers moved a step closer to allowing scientists to create babies from the DNA of 3 people.
Mr. Speaker,
the British House of Commons Tuesday passing legislation that legalizes the modification of the human embryo. If it's passed in the House of Lords, the UK will be the first nation in the world to allow the procedure. The techniques developed at Newcastle University would be used to modify genes that cause defects in the mitochondria, which can lead to things like muscular dystrophy, heart, and liver disease. The vote giving women like Olivia Seaby, who suffer from the disorder, hope that one day they can give birth to a healthy child.
Life expectancy for a child in mitochondria is very short, and I think that's devastating for a woman.
British scientists have long been on the forefront of genetics. Researchers in Scotland making a major breakthrough in 1998 with the first successful animal cloning of Dolly the sheep. UK law currently bans the modification of the human genome.
According to BBC.com, England is currently leading the way in passing legislation and performing experiments that have to do with creating babies with DNA gathered from 3 parents. In order to provide a solution to the issue of babies being born with mutated mitochondria, leading to serious diseases such as brain damage, blindness, and heart failure, Scientists attempt to extract the parent's nucleus from the mutated egg of the mother and place it into the healthy egg of the donor, leading to the birth of a child with 99.9% of the DNA of his or her parents and 0.01% of the DNA of the donor. Although this is a very groundbreaking process, some strong opposition exists due to beliefs that scientists would be playing God, as well as worries that failed human genetic modification experiments could lead to thousands of destroyed human embryos. Regardless, the English government has officially approved genetic modification experimentation in the hopes of saving numerous lives in the future. As I stated before, the Industrial Revolution was one of England's greatest contributions of all time to the world. The country took up manufacturing and significantly increased its rate of exports in the hopes of spurring its economy. Although England is no longer the country with the highest manufacturing rate in the world due to its relatively small size, it still plays a central role in the global economy and can be held responsible for initiating the Industrial Revolution. According to the Manufacturer.com, the UK manufacturing industry ranks in at number 11 on the global level. However, with such a high production rate, environmental drawbacks are inevitable. As a direct result of the Industrial Revolution, global damage to the environment has increased tremendously. Factory operation in city areas has caused increased air pollution with the production of dense fog of soot and noxious waste gases, as well as increased water pollution with the rivers and canals being polluted with sewage and industrial waste. Furthermore, fossil fuels such as coal and oil that allow for the operation of industry are quickly being depleted. Current estimates state that the world's coal supply will only last until the year 2088, at which point a new source of energy will be necessary. Overall, while the Industrial Revolution was a positive turning point in the world in terms of technological advancement, it also marked the beginning of an era of environmental decimation.